There is a rule inside the Jehovah's Witness organization that most people outside of it have never heard of. It is called the two-witness rule, and it works like this. If a child reports sexual abuse, no internal action is decisively taken unless there is a second witness to the abuse or a confession. But as Sam Carling put it in the UK Parliament, there are never two witnesses to child sexual abuse. That rule has been criticized by inquiries and survivors for years because in practice it can leave victims unprotected and abusers untouched. Now, one of the people challenging it is a young MP who grew up inside the very system he is criticizing. Sam Carling is the Labour MP in the UK. He is the first British parliamentarian born in the 21st century, and he has become one of the most important voices in Parliament on safeguarding failures in small religious organizations. He was born in 2002 in Bishop Auckland and grew up in County Durham in a family he has described as working class and apolitical. He was raised a Jehovah's Witness, attended meetings, took part in the door-to-door ministry, and grew up fully inside the organization. But at around 11 years of age, he realized he was gay. That made his position inside the congregation even more painful. He has said that he regularly heard sermons condemning homosexuality, and the environment he grew up in made him feel excluded from the world around him. Growing up gay inside an organization that preaches that homosexuality is morally equivalent to pedophilia from the pulpit repeatedly is not something that leaves you easily. And Carling has been clear and public about the impact it had. And despite that background, Carling went on to study at Christ's College, Cambridge, where he earned a first-class degree in natural sciences. He became active in student politics and later served on the Cambridge City Council, and in 2024 won North West Cambridgeshire for Labour by just 39 votes after a recount. And once in Parliament, he wasted no time using his platform, and he has become one of the most informed and determined voices in British politics on the subject of child protection in religious organizations.
The question is that this House do now adjourn Sam Carling on safeguarding in small religious organisations, and I call Sam Carling.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over this Labour government's term in office so far, we have spent a lot of time discussing and highlighting the evils of child abuse and the exploitation of children, in particular women and girls. And there's been a lot of progress. The audit from Baroness Casey into grooming gangs raised several recommendations which we've already been putting in motion, with the reforms we're making to taxi licensing and safety through the English Devolution Bill being a key example. But I want to open today by talking about an issue which I have previously discussed with the Minister. That is the mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse, one of the key recommendations from the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, ICSA. I approach this issue as someone who grew up in a small religious organisation, the Jehovah's Witnesses, which ICSA recognised as having a serious problem with child sexual abuse.
The idea of a child from a Jehovah's Witness household growing up to become a member of Parliament is, from the Watchtowers' perspective, a near-perfect example of what they warn against: a member who let the world's values pull them away from the congregation's priorities. And speaking in the House of Commons on safeguarding in small religious organizations, Carling said, "I approached this issue as someone who grew up in a small religious organization, the Witnesses, which ICSA recognized as having a serious problem with child sexual abuse." He told MPs that last June he had already raised concerns that the government's proposed mandatory reporting law had been significantly watered down from the recommendations of the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. He identified three major problems.
Last June, I stood here and highlighted my concerns that the government's proposals to introduce mandatory reporting in the Crime and Policing Bill have been significantly watered down from ICSA's recommendations. And I raised three issues. Firstly, a lack of proper sanctions for non-compliance. Secondly, the fact that the duty proposed is limited to applying only when someone receives a direct disclosure or witnesses abuse happening, not when they have strong reasons to suspect it, only when they know. And thirdly, loopholes in who is included. In particular, the drafting required religious leaders to have unsupervised contact with children to come under the duty. And I set out why that would allow most lay religious leaders to escape the duty, despite holding enormous power and influence over their followers, using the particular example of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I do have some good news to begin with. Just a few hours ago, the House of Lords approved a government-backed amendment to remove the word unsupervised from that definition of religious leaders. And I want to thank the Minister, as well as her Lord's counterpart, Lord Hanson, for listening to my lobbying on that front. That small change could make a real difference in protecting children from abuse in small religious organisations. But it will only make the most difference if we fix the other two issues, where there's not been as much progress. I won't rehash my arguments in detail here about why they are so critical. I will give way.
Now think about what that means in practice. A congregation elder, someone who holds enormous spiritual and social authority over every family in his congregation, someone who is the first point of contact when abuse is reported, someone who makes the decision about whether to invoke the two-witness rule, would not be required by law to report what he hears because he doesn't have, quote, regular unsupervised contact with children. That loophole was written for organizations exactly like the Watchtower, and Carley named it from the floor of Parliament. The third problem he mentioned involves charity law. Carley said that there are a lot of small religious organizations in the country who get away with teaching abhorrent things and still are able to be registered as charities, which means that they get various tax exemptions. He's calling for the law to be changed so that organizations whose teachings or practices cause demonstrable harm to children cannot continue to benefit from charitable status. And then he thanked the minister and Lord Hanson for listening to his lobbying and said the change could make a real difference in protecting children from abuse in small religious organizations. But he made clear that the other problems remained. He said that ICSA had been clear that both strong sanctions and the inclusion of reasonable suspicion were essential to create a duty that works. He also pointed to international evidence saying that in religious organizations where there is such a strong culture of distrusting secular authorities, there is no other way to make them do the right thing. Then he returned to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and Carling told the House that the Australian Royal Commission found the Jehovah's Witnesses in that country had documented 1,006 cases of child sexual abuse and reported not even one to the police.
And I again highlight the work of the Australian Royal Commission, which found that the Jehovah's Witnesses in that country had documented 1,006 cases of child sexual abuse and reported not even one to police. Not one. That is not an accident. That is a systemic cover-up on a catastrophic level.
Not one, he said. That is not an accident. That is a systemic cover-up on a catastrophic level. That line is the issue here. It is a system that can make abuse allegations disappear unless there is independent proof, which is often impossible in child abuse cases. And that is exactly why critics say it fails the children it claims to protect. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse found that Jehovah's Witnesses organization had the third highest number of sexual abuse victims after the Catholic and the Anglican churches. The second level is legal. What Carling is doing in Parliament is not just personal testimony. He is doing detailed, technically informed legislative work, identifying specific gaps in a major bill, proposing specific amendments, and engaging with the Home Secretary directly on the record. He is moving the needle. The third level is structural. The issues Carling is raising, mandatory reporting, charity law, the two-witness rule, the treatment of gay members, are not peculiar to one congregation or one country. They are systemic. They exist in every Jehovah's Witness congregation in the United Kingdom, because the Watchtowers policies are globally uniform. What calling names in Parliament applies equally to the Kingdom Hall in your town. And the fourth level is what his story represents for the thousands of people who left the Watchtower and have never had a public voice. And Carling said he's keen to use his platform to give a voice to other former Jehovah's Witnesses, saying there are a lot of people who have left that religion that have the same concerns that he does. And for most former Jehovah's Witnesses, leaving meant losing everything: family, friends, community, identity, with no platform, no protection, and no one in power who understood what they had been through. Sam Carling is, for the first time in British political history, that person in power, and is using every bit of it. The Watchtower organization will respond to Carling's parliamentary interventions with their position that is consistent with what they say publicly on the subject. The organization says Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child sexual abuse, maintain clear, globally applied safeguarding policies, and teach that anyone with knowledge of abuse is free to report it to the authorities. And I want to address that statement directly because I think it deserves a precise response rather than just a dismissal. The claim that members are free to report abuse to the authorities is technically true. The Watchtower does not explicitly tell members now they are forbidden from calling the police, but freedom to report and a culture that encourages reporting are two different things. When your organization has a deeply embedded distrust of secular authorities, when your elders are the first point of contact for any allegation, when the internal processes requires 2 witnesses before any action is taken, and when reporting to the police risks being labeled a troublemaker or worse, the theoretical freedom to report is not the same as a functional safeguarding system. An organization that tells its elders to destroy documents is not an organization whose safeguarding policies deserve to be taken at face value. And an organization that has registered charity status in the UK while those policies are in place is an organization that the law has not yet caught up with. And that is what Sam Carling is trying to change. Sam Carling is 22 years old. He won his seat by 39 votes. He is the youngest person ever elected to the British Parliament in the 21st century. And he grew up being told that gay people are evil and sinners, that the outside world is corrupt, and that the government he now sits in is an illegitimate human institution that will be replaced by God's kingdom. He left all of that, and then he walked into that illegitimate human institution and started changing it. The Crime and Policing Bill is still moving through Parliament. The amendments Carling is pushing for, a criminal sanction for non-compliance with the reporting duty, a broader definition of religious leaders, changes to charity law, are live legislative proposals, and this story is not finished. We will follow it. If there are votes, if there are amendments or rulings that affect this legislation, we will cover them here. And if you are in the UK and you have been affected by the Watchtowers policies on child abuse reporting, as a survivor, a former elder, a parent, or a professional who has encountered this, Sam Carling's office is a place where that testimony matters now in a way it has never mattered before. His contact details are publicly available through the UK Parliament website. And if you are watching this as a former Jehovah's Witness anywhere in the world, I want you to know that what Carling said on the floor of Parliament under parliamentary privilege about a culture of non-reporting and forgiveness for child abusers, that is the clearest, most authoritative public statement about the Watchtowers' safeguarding failures that has ever been made in a national legislature in any country. So subscribe if you haven't yet, like and share, and until next time.